So welcome for the fourth DigiCafé. It's not been so long since we've been together at our annual conference, but now it's time for this live conversation. And then, of course, we will be sharing for the ones who couldn't make it and share live with us this conversation, the video and audio recording. So welcome, Jeanne, and thank you so much for having this conversation right before a wonderful presentation that you shared in our conference and also a roundtable about employers' perspectives on employee assistance services and the future of our industry. So our conversation is going to be a little bit about how do you perceive, coming from Medtronic, like the evolving employee assistance services, how it is provided globally, because Medtronic is a global company, but also how do you keep the human touch? And this is very linked with the conversation and discussions that we have and the theme of our annual conference. So I will start by asking you, Jeanne, could you share with us a bit about how Medtronic employee assistance programs have evolved through the years, a bit of history, a bit of evolution, and the different internal and external combination of services that you provide? For us to get a sense of the evolution and how Medtronic has really implemented and is implementing now and in the future, and the expectation for the future in terms of employee assistance.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for having me and thanks for joining too. I know some of you just heard me talk less than a month ago, so appreciate you tuning in. So thinking about starting with the history of the Medtronic Employee Assistance Program, I will try my best to do it justice because it very much precedes my time. It's really been a staple for Medtronic for a long time. So to give a little bit of context, Medtronic this summer has had its 75th anniversary. So we've been around for 75 years. The Employee Assistance Program through Medtronic is not too far behind. So it's a program that's had decades and decades of support for Medtronic employees, and also led by really exceptional clinicians, I will say too. So quite a legacy of really good professionals leading the program. And so Medtronic started in Minneapolis, Minnesota in the United States. So that's where I sit. So as with the company, the employee assistance program started being very localized. So in-house, on-site counselors, and it really stayed that way for a little bit of time. As with the rest of the employee assistance program field, really started focusing on that substance use treatment, those type of resources. As the company grew, some of the areas of expertise for the Medtronic Employee Assistance Program grew. We expanded not only within the US, but globally. And so for a while, there was still only a local solution for employee assistance program at Medtronic. Expanded into the United States, and then really took a little bit of time to expand globally. But how that happened really was a combination between continuing to have an internal team that was located in the Minneapolis area, and then the use of vendors to provide for our employees who were not local. The local team for a while did some specialization in like career counseling too, which now is a little bit unique to EAPs. So a lot of DISC assessments, a lot of EQI assessments. And of course, we've had our vendors to help provide that counseling while our internal team did that as well. So for a long time, how that looked was having an internal team local in the Twin Cities who kind of provided anything. We were, here for walk in, knock on our door if you have a question. And then we utilized providers in the US and globally to make sure we had that full EAP experience. So we've had that traditional EAP for a long time. So the counseling, the legal, the financial, through our vendor partners. We talked about
was always perceived as, always perceived for Medtronic as a valuable response, not just locally in the headquarters, but to that the employees valued, that the employer valued. Do you have a feeling that the company really valued and implemented thoroughly the program?
Yeah, I do. And, of course, I'm going to be biased and think our program was the best, but I really do think we had something special. I started at Medtronic in 2020, so right after the pandemic started and everybody was working from home. So prior to the pandemic, our local providers would be busy 8 to 5, have lines outside their door of people just stopping by to talk, to ask a question. To our HR partners would come in at the end of the day to debrief a really hard day. And I never got to experience that, but that was kind of the legacy that I came into, was lines outside the door. So I do really feel that it was, and still is, really valuable to our employees.
Mm-hmm. In the so the evolution was not to de-invest. It was just to align with what it's needed, what it's, what is the times also, and the different
Yeah.
ways of engagement, and also, the provision of specific services and the specialization. What are for you right now the key challenges that you face today within Medtronic, within providing these services? What are the key challenges that you face?
Yeah. So, as with many large organizations, we're always changing. So we're in this constant phase of adapting. Um, I mentioned this at the conference, but ever since I've been part of the employee assistance program, it's really been surviving one crisis to the next crisis. And, one of the things that has changed a little bit for us is in the last couple of months, we've switched our model to really be almost fully dependent on our vendor partners. So I'm here managing our program, but the actual delivery of services, we are fully relying on our external partners now. So that's a shift. And I think I don't want to say it's a key challenge, but a key piece of what's important to me is really that trust with our providers across the globe. Because, like I mentioned, I felt like we had something special here, and it's hard to shift that to some new partners that you really have to lean on. So that's been something that it's been, going well so far because we have great partners, but an area of growth. So the key challenge really again is always adapting to change is
Mm-hmm.
and going with it. You have to be flexible. So that's not always easy.
True, true. And aside flexibility and really be able to open to adapt, some lessons that you've learned for the time already that you've been engaged with a more internal, but also coordinating external providers across the world. Some lessons learned that you would like to share with us. What's really key to make this kind of coherence in terms of the service provision, the quality of the services provider, and being in line with the evolving needs, right? What are
Mhm.
some lessons aside the flexibility that you would like to
Yeah.
share?
Yeah. So I've learned some things on how I like to work with providers, but I'll also talk a little bit about some things that I think I need from providers. And I think one thing that's a cultural shift is I think maybe a lot of us in the EAP field experience this, but we can't be everything to everyone. We can't meet every need. And sometimes it's not an expectation, but it's something where as helpers, that's ingrained in our personality. We want to help, we want to find an answer. And so a lesson learned for me is really trying to figure out where that line is. I can't fix this for you, but here's what I can do. I can talk to you, I can offer support. And so I think it's really accepting sometimes when we can't meet the ask and then trying to figure out how to pivot so we can at least make them feel supported. And then on the provider side, I feel like um, I've had this conversation with some of our external providers is simply saying no isn't always helpful. Sometimes, of course, there's limitations of the services that are available, and we understand that. But rather than just saying, no, we don't do that, it goes a long way to say, we don't do that, but let's talk about another way we can help. Let's talk about another solution, or we don't do it that way, but what if we engage this party to help us? What if we bring in an external consultant that's, that we can contract with? So it's really just more to say, like, trying to find creative solutions goes a long way, versus just saying, nope, we don't do it. Good luck on your own.
Yes, but it's interesting also because it's also a concept of collaboration, right?
Yes.
Instead of just, a single provider, a single large provider, whatever, the perspective of it's quite impossible nowadays to offer such a personalized care and reply to all the needs.
Mhm.
So it's much more on a collaborative network of providers, partners, consultants, whatever, than, the typical one provider, one global provider, for instance, which is,
Mhm.
typical of, some parts of this industry. But this also reflects on the attitude, right? So the vendor is not, the provider cannot just be concentrated, this is our, this is the service that we provide, but he could actually bring value connecting to other local providers or local experts that could help with very specific needs of the client organization, the team, that the Medtronic team, locally. It
Mhm.
makes sense, but it's a different mindset, I think, also for business collaboration and being much more open to offer new things, right?
Yeah. And it's also it's an interesting concept because for really large companies who have employees in over 100 countries, it's really difficult to have a contract with each local provider. It's really difficult. So a lot of
Mhm.
times companies are relying on kind of one larger provider that works with localized providers, right? And so I think what's been really valuable though is being able to work with both. So yes, our overall contract is with this provider, but we've built these relationships with our providers who are on the ground, the ones who are actually talking to our employees.
Mhm.
So our employees have kind of learned where to go and they've built those relationships. And so I think I guess what I'm trying to say is there doesn't have to be like a one or the other, go all individual localized or all,
Yeah,
kind of big box.
because contract
Yeah.
management is very complicated with, when once you are present in more than 100 countries. But what you mentioned now that I find very interesting, Jean, is like, um also particularly in situations as a crisis, or there's a clear local situation, or whether a war conflict, whether climate disaster, whatever, some instability that actually will, increase the incidence of critical incident management, or the provision of EAP service will augment. You will need this local contact, I imagine, because you will need to really be able to get information of what's needed and what type of resources they will need to allocate to a specific
Mhm.
response, right?
Yeah, yep. And I actually just last week had a really good example of that working smoothly with our change to our model. When I'm out of the office, it's just me. I don't have a backup that's internal to Medtronic. So I really need to rely on our provider partners. And I was on vacation, but I had a Teams chat from one of our global stakeholders saying, "Hey, I need you for a second." And I didn't get to it for it was about 15 minutes. And I said, "Hey, what's going on? Can I help?" And they're like, "Sorry, didn't realize you were out of office. I already got in contact with Dr. X, Y, and Z from our local provider." And so I thought it was really great that they knew who to go to and were being taken care of in probably again a 15-minute window that I wasn't available to help support that particular crisis. And then
Yeah.
more to your point to Liliana, the things that have I talked about being in between crisis all the time, natural disasters, civil unrest, war, conflict. When our providers give me materials to help our local stakeholders without me needing to ask, that's like getting a present. That's like getting a gift wrapped into my inbox, you know? And so that goes really a long way and really helps our employees out.
So become also, so you value also proactivity, right? So the local provider, which is of course articulated with a more global provider, but still it's still in connection with the main company, or you know the company who these employees work for, and he's proactive. You know, these people for sure need this, and we have this kind of content, information, you know, increase the access or make it more visible that people could have access to this kind of service. That makes a lot of sense. And I think it also, you mentioned in the conference, to not lose the human connection in the process, right? And I think
Mhm.
it also mentions this, the human connection is not just centralized in you, I would imagine. So the company needs to really understand who are the people to connect with, right? And to be able
Mhm.
to articulate responses and to be able to evaluate also the impact of the services and you know the capacity. But you mentioned this human touch and the relationship and the trust that has to be built, right? Mm-hmm.
Mhm. Yeah. And I will say too, even from a individual standpoint, while I can't directly provide the services to, I think maybe sometime in the spring, our employees in the Dominican Republic had some flooding, a big storm. And while I'm not going to be there on the ground providing support, I think one thing that goes a long way, being a Medtronic employee myself, is I'll try as much as I can when there's natural disasters to reach out to those local stakeholders and say, hey, I heard this is going on. Here's the resources we have. Do you need anything from me? Let me know. And although realistically there may not be a lot that I can directly support with, I think that personal touch, that human connection goes a long way. Oh, somebody cares about me. They're paying attention. And I think that's really big.
Mm-hmm. But you also, you know, you're already using some technology, right?
Mhm.
Some technology, whether apps, whether, you know, other types of technology to ensure the employee assistance services and innovation, and also, you know, go with the different channels to provide the service. How
Mhm.
do you ensure, first, do you think it's a good idea, the benefits of it, but also how do you ensure that the servant remains human and remains completely um, you know, anchored in the expertise of, you know, mental health professionals and people that are available to support, and also legal advice, and also other issues that the
Mhm.
employee needs. How do you combine technology? What are the benefits? Did you see good cases that you could share with us, but also the challenges to remain human?
Yeah. Yeah. So I am all for apps and technology as long as there is still a human connection option. So we do have virtual therapy and counseling available. We do have virtual behavioral health coaching available globally. And I think that works really well for some. I think with the changing workforce, the younger generations coming into the workforce,
Mm-hmm.
they will value that maybe more than some folks who are kind of getting towards the later part of their career. But to me, I've never considered, and I don't think it's a good idea right now to solely have an app, because while we've found as mental health professionals, we found that telehealth works, virtual counseling works, it has great benefits. People still want in-person counseling. And so we can't completely take that away because it's not meeting the client need. So we do, again, we do have apps, we do have virtual offerings to make work-life requests. But my worry is always, what happens if that just gets lost in the cloud? What do we do with that? We have to have somebody available to answer a phone and talk to a person. And so we haven't taken that option away. It's not really on my radar to do that, but I think it's working together. have an option, choose what you like, have a person who can help you if you get stuck.
So it's more on the diversity of access points than just choosing one because it's more cost
Yeah.
effective and just relying on that one, which is the opposite way we started our conversation, right? Because in terms of healthcare, the model has to become much more preventive, much more
Mhm.
personalized, right? That's the tendency of the healthcare provision. And if you just have a one access point and now it's just the app, you will lose the possibility to reach out and to make employees comfortable in accessing with other different points. Some people do prefer video counseling, some still prefer in-person counseling, some just like rely on the app, right? And more automated service provision, such as apps with CBT that doesn't need necessarily, for instance, any mental health directly. Only in specific situations they could reach out. But the diversity and how much access points you will have, you see this is a value that you will increase, of course, utilization, that you will increase, of course, impact, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll also say too with apps, I mean, technology and AI is getting better, but there's not always great language offerings. It's not always a global program is not always truly global. If they don't have the appropriate language offerings, the appropriate cultural expectations for those regions, for different regions across the globe. And again, we can do automated translation, but we know that that's not always 100% accurate. So that, to your point, it's not always accessible. So we do have to have the variety of access points.
Mm-hmm. One last question, a little bit, in your daily work, what are the key priorities in your agenda? Do you follow up with, the vendors? Do you have strategic discussions? What are the typical activities that you do in your daily work? I'm just curious. This is not on the list, but I'm just curious.
Yes. So for a while, my schedule has been, it always looks very different on a Monday morning than it does by the end of the week. While we have, switched our model to really relying on our vendors, there are still a lot of internal things that I support. So I'm not doing internal counseling. It's just not feasible with
Yeah.
100,000 employees. I am still part of our corporate crisis team. I'm part of our internal threat assessment team. If there's critical cases, if we have concerns about suicidality, self-harm, harm to others, those are cases that I'm still jumping in to provide consultation, perhaps helping a really sensitive case get connected to care through one of our vendors. So as far as clinical work, those are kind of the things that I'm still doing on the clinical side. And then your other part of the question, yes, I'm talking to our account executives at our providers multiple times a day. They're probably sick of me, but it's great. It's good. I would be more concerned if we were meeting once a month and then, you know, not not talking. So there's really an open dialogue. So
Yes.
having
Mm-hmm.
regular touch points and then really trying to make sure I'm keeping updated on what's going on with our employee population.
Yes, for sure. And it's also, I think, not only disclose connection, but also getting the information on time, right? Because otherwise you will not be able to, influence decisions that needs to be taken care of or other resources that need to be activated. So it makes all the sense. So thank you so much, Jean. And we're going to open up the floor now to any Q&A and comments. So please, Maurice, Ada, Eileen, Patricia, and Claudia, do switch on your cameras, okay? And I'm going to ask you a question while we wait for the questions of our participants
Mhm.
also. So you are also a trained clinician, right? And
Mhm.
as you explained, do you see the role of also a clinician evolving with this technology? How do you see a clinician working in this field? How do you see the evolution of
Yeah.
our job, of our work, of our competences over time?
Yeah. This is so interesting and it's really timely. Um, last night my husband, just for context for you, said he went to an AI something or other, and really there's nothing AI can't do that humans do. And as a clinician, as a mental health therapist, I was like, no, AI cannot be a counselor. They cannot do it. I think where I see the role of counselors and mental health professionals, we have to continue to prove our worth and stay relevant. I don't think it's going to, right now anyway, I don't see that it's going to be that hard because of how much people still want to talk to a human. Even if it's not your therapist, there's so much that you can get from just having like a face-to-face conversation with a friend. The way that it can make you feel afterwards, people are not ready to let that go. And it's not the same if, AI asks how you're feeling and you tell them you're not feeling good and they generate a list of self-care strategies. That's not going to be the answer. So I think we can use AI to help us get information. I think we can use technology to help guide a level of care, but the actual service itself, I am a strong advocate for there has to be a human on the other side.
It's interesting. I will link back to a comment of our first DigiCafé. So we invited Maisie, and Maisie Dale actually shared an insight very interesting about the fact that also in employee assistance, the context is the context of work. So, and if our service provision is completely technological and it's done outside of the context of work, will it not lose the focus of an employee assistance program, which is, in the work setting, which makes it a lot different than general mental health support, like for the general population, right? And she mentioned this, that perhaps getting back to the basics, and you now linking to your comment, it's like we want to evolve, and technology is also very seductive, but at the same time, the basic is still needed. And perhaps when you were mentioning the human needs of people at work to receive counseling, guidance, any kind of support in a specific moment that they are struggling, they will still value, the one-to-one relationship, and the feel that they are supported by another human. But it's true that the dazzle with technology sometimes can just, let's say, raise humans from it. And
Yeah.
it's very strange because
Great.
also
Yeah.
but how do you see also even the youngest employees reacting to technology? Do you think that they really prefer, the digital access, the more automated, or they still value in specific situations, the traditional model of counseling?
Yeah. So what I think about with that question is one of the other presentations at the conference in Prague, talking about how apps, when they're new, have a huge
A
sign up
spike.
rate.
Yeah.
Yep.
It was
And then
Anka. It was Anka, right?
yes, it
Yeah.
was. Yep. It was great. It was a great presentation. And I find that to be true. When there's a promotion, when there's an email blast, there's a spike in signups. But what we really want to see is the number of people who are still actively engaged in the app. So I don't have, any solid data to say whether the younger people are really sticking with it and engaging with apps. I do know that what I start to see is that younger generation really more open to talking about mental health too. And so while there's still, people are using TikTok as a platform for mental health and talking about it, it's still human connection in some way. So I don't necessarily think that generation is going to make that change to, yes, I just want AI,
Yeah, a little bit like the expression, we are entering in a context of high technology, but at the same time, high touch. So
Yeah.
you either prefer something that it is very digital, very agile, very, completely automated, or you prefer the other opposite, which in specific situation you would want something high touch, right? Completely hands-on. But we have here Maurice and Ada and Claudia. Would you like to comment a little bit on the conversation? It's always wonderful to hear a little bit from you or experience what we've been discussing. Jeanne has been so kind to share a little bit the evolution of EAP at Medtronic, the evolution from an internal or regional and, very linked with the history of employee assistance in the US, right? But also evolving into a more external vendor network of provision across the world. So Maurice, would you like to comment? Add? Yes? Go ahead. Switch on your micro. We can't hear you. Do switch on the, can I ask you to unmute? Yeah. Would you unmute? Yes.
I'm unmuted. Okay. This is my first time joining a DigiCafé, so I'm learning how it operates. I've joined for the specific purpose to learn and to share my experience. I had the pleasure of introducing the occupational alcoholism program to Europe in 1985. And I've watched the evolution. And what I'm saying now to EAP practitioners is employee assistance is changing, undergoing the biggest change that I can remember. And I believe that employee assistance, if it remains as it is starting to lose relevance. And there's two major factors in it, in Europe, in the EU and in Europe. First of all, the EU countries, the 27 EU countries, receive directions and guidance from the European Commission. The two major changes have been, one is the Institution of Occupational Safety and Health are now declaring that EAPs have lost their relevance and are now saying that safety managers should be the leaders going forward. Safety managers and employee support therapy. A new way of looking at it. Now, basically, it's talking about risk assessment, prevention. It's talking about a new language, safety managers. And they have produced what we call guidance. IOSH have produced guidance. Now, at the moment, we have been following that guidance. And the new trend is the release of the ISO 45003 standard. Now, I believe, and a lot of people believe, that those two factors will change how employee assistance is delivered.
In what way? Could you detail a little bit how it will impact directly?
In what? Well, number one, they're calling on prevention, risk assessment, the role of safety managers, compliance. The profession is moving towards compliance rather than counseling, and a new model of employee support therapy. That's basically what IOSH, the Institute of OSH, are promoting. They have 50,000 members worldwide. And the other major influences from the ISO 450 standards on psychological and psychosocial risks in the workplace. We're speaking a new language.
True.
And
can I just add, Maurice, that actually it's in the law in many countries already for many years, particularly, Portugal is a little bit late, I think. but I think the law in Portugal is from 2009, but in Belgium it's from 1998, something like that. So the countries have been legislating a lot about psychosocial risk assessment, stress assessment, and it's been part of the legislation for long. And so companies do need to be compliant. There's a long way to go in some countries, so it's not entirely the same, but I do understand what you mean. It's a model also on shifting also to preventive mode, right? So it's not just waiting for the employees to call or to assess or to ask for any kind of service. We need to be on different levels of intervention, right? It's that what you are mentioning, like primary intervention, secondary intervention, not just when they already have symptoms or problems or issues to address, right?
Well, I don't see any evidence of that change presently.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
The other major issue is the EAP profession in the US has not responded to the personal problems of alcohol and drugs in the workplace. So what is happening with alcohol and drugs in the workplace? How are EAPs dealing with them? In the States, they've been ignored.
Mm-hmm.
Are we doing the same in Europe?
Mm-hmm. That's a huge question for us to ask also, and it could be a discussion on the next DigiCafé just on the drug abuse or any kind of interventions and showcase a little bit what's been done. But also, I think in the first DigiCafé, Del Mazy also mentioned that the drug abuse and alcohol consumption, which is like the origin of the EAPs, in a way, has been a little bit forgotten, right? Has been forgotten. Mm-hmm. True. Thank you so much, Maurice.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Ada and Claudia, would you like to add something or some comments and reflections?
Well, I think that is very interesting because also as an EAP provider, I think that we deal with several stakeholders, and now technology start to be a new stakeholder that appears in this relationship. And there are so many issues that we need to have in consideration. As I mentioned also in Prague, I think that my main concern is when you have a lot of asymmetry, when maybe with management, they want to start with a very technology solutions that maybe will be great. But when you have asymmetries between your own population, not between countries, just your own population inside a one country, I think that we need to be very careful how we can implement, test, and pivot about technology in order to be sure that it accomplishes with other stakeholders' interest, And the other thing that I think that we need to have in consideration is when the population starts to feel more dependent of technology, because when it's very dependent, there are situations, as Jeanne mentioned, for example, earthquakes, natural disasters, where the technology doesn't work, and you need to have a big plan, because if you just depend on technology and your channels also, for example, of contact, an EAP is just through an app, it's possible that in those critical situations, when you most need the EAP, you're not going to be available for these people.
Yeah, and also because you, as Jeanne was mentioning, right? So you have to have different capabilities to handle critical incidents and to handle, to have teams that are ready to, to be there. And if you rely on just a technological, even if it's a language model, intelligent model, but still it doesn't work in a situation where you lose communication, when you lose access to the internet, it simply is down, right? And we need to prepare for that. That's very good point. And it's also a risk preparation, right? To consider different scenarios and to be able to, will you be able to provide services in this and this and this and this situation? And we are heading to a world that is demanding much and more preparation for this different kind of more drastic scenarios, right, Claudia?
Yes, and I agree with Jeanne that it is important, the human connection. You cannot lose that human connection, because of course technology needs to help us, and it's going to allow us to be more how do you say, productive, but we cannot depend on this. So the human connection is very important, especially in those crisis situations where you most need this kind of services.
And linking with something that you mentioned also, Jeanne, in the conference, I think, the oversight of the system by humans, right? So by qualified mental health professionals that really understand what are the solution, what is the solution intended to do, how the solution is actually intervening, and if it's safe, and if it's actually providing, the value that we want. Because sometimes I think, in the design of these solutions, sometimes I don't see any psychologists involved. I don't see any specialized in behavioral change or treatment involved. So it's also a question when, does this really work? And does it do exactly what it's supposed to do, right? And I think it's also a matter of overseeing, the provisions, the apps, the systems, everything that, how the information is also treated, right? I remember the case of, I think it was a health provider that was actually selling records of the interventions, a mental health app in the United States. I think it was in the United States, I'm not sure, but I think it was in a mental health app that was selling the data from the users. So, and without their consent, of course, and it was of course doing something unethical, and it was I can't remember the name of the provider, but it was a very serious case of violation of confidentially.
Mhm.
Thank you.
I think that's also something that you just said, Liliana. That's a really good point, in that we still do have so many clinicians that have different areas of expertise. And so the one size fits all, even for a live counselor, doesn't work. Sometimes we may need to help our employees find somebody who has training in treating victims of trauma or domestic violence, where a different clinician or, might not meet that ask. And we still have the power to help make those appropriate referrals too. Whereas you can't, train an app to be specialists in those areas.
Yes, very interesting. Ada, would you like to add something? And Alan also? Go ahead.
Just relating the technology versus human, I can say that, after COVID, we saw that, that everybody will move now to video, to remote counseling. And we were so surprised to see the young generation, okay, this high-tech people, they want all face-to-face. And even they limit us, We are laughing all the time that they want a therapist near their cafe, but really, they don't want digital counseling. So sometimes I feel that it's more the like the companies wants their employees to have all this set of solutions, but most of them will be, at least in Israel, this is what we see, will be very traditional in the way they and sometimes
even the younger generation, right?
And
even
the younger generation, because you could be surprised, I'm not talking about, depression, about anxiety, about very emotional issues, but sometimes it's like career issues or something, that you wouldn't expect, somebody to be so much into the personal counseling. But at least with us, we still see the need for
interesting.
person counseling.
Yeah. And we've seen this in the content of several conferences before. I remember, I think it was someone from Pulso also sharing that they had this expectation that a more digital application to assess, I think it was more related to psychosocial risks. But then in the end, the young also drop out of the app. So the utilization goes down for everyone, and they will still prefer more traditional channels and more traditional approaches. But yes. So any more comments? Jeanne, would you like to just have a final comment or a wrap up of our,
I come
Yeah.
to say thank you for the opportunity of attending.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Jean, Liliana, Ada, and Claudia. It's nice to meet all of you. And I look forward to being at the next DigiCafé.
Yes,
I would ask that you consider at some stage putting the subject of alcohol and drugs in the workplace.
will do. Will do. Will do. We still have an opening, I think. Well, if it's not for December, perhaps we start the year 2025 with that discussion. And I can invite you, Maurice, I can invite you to come and we will have a discussion and showcase a little bit what's happening also from our members. But Jean, do have like a final message or a final comment and a wrap up.
I don't have brilliant words of wisdom to leave you with today, except that let's keep in touch. I think that's been my main message the last month or so is we need to keep having the conversations. As Maurice said, that's something that I worry about somebody being a little bit newer in the EAP field is, are we still relevant? And we have to find different ways to stay relevant. And so that's something that's always on my mind. And so I think doing that together, collaborating, like you said, Liliana, is going to be key.
Yeah, and we truly believe this at EAF, because without that, and also because Europe also has a different type of history of employee assistance. It's a little bit different from the United States, from North America, and even from the UK. There's different history within Europe of the implementation of the the utilization of this kind of services and the nature of the diversity of the as Maurice was mentioning, we had to move into a preventive model more because the legislation pushed us through. So we have been dealing with a lot of different challenges, but I think we can collaborate because we have ideas from different experience and models. But at the same time, I think we all agree that employee assistance is completely and more than ever relevant, and the challenges are more than ever prevalent. So we cannot just put the towel down and and quit. We have to find solutions, and of course the evolution of the market, of the different providers and the professionals, and to be able to provide the better services with at the same time this combination that we are saying, okay, we can be high tech, but we have to be high touch at the same time. And I think that's a big learning and mantra for what can be the future. Thank you so much for coming. It's always so nice to see different faces each time we do the recording. As you know, this will be recorded for the ones that of course have work engagements and couldn't make it, but this is also consumed as content for other members. So it will be something that we will share, and they will, of course, at least reflect on the conversation that we just had live. Thank you so much. Have a great end of the week. And thank you, Jean, for your sharing, not just at the conference, but also now. And we will continue the conversation for sure. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Good to see
Thank
you all.
you. Have a nice day.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.